to our second session of our special podcast series on the Farmer's Guardian podcast, brought to you by the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper Adams University. This session is all about animal health and welfare, and I've got my brilliant panellists here. Nathan, can you first tell me a bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. I'm Nathan McClure. I am a placement student currently working with a beef processor in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland. We have a dairy farm at home, so I suppose traditionally that was my first introduction to agriculture.
Brilliant, thanks Nathan. And Molly?
Hi, I'm Molly. So I live on my family's beef and sheep farm in Hertfordshire, where we also make our own rapeseed oil and have a farm shop. My occupation is a vet technician and TB tester. I'm also an NFU student and Young Farmer Ambassador, and I'm doing the livestock vet technician apprenticeship at Harper Adams.
Brilliant, very busy then, Molly. And Jack?
Hello, my name's Jack. I'm a beef farmer from Herefordshire. We also do store lambs to finish, cider apples and arable.
So animal health and welfare is such a huge topic, but a really important and critical one for the resilience of our farm businesses, no matter what the setup is. First of all, what does animal health and welfare mean to you all? So if I start off with you, Jack.
Well, it's a massive part of the business, because if your livestock's happy, then they're obviously going to be doing and producing good quality meat, and hopefully reward and move a good price on the way out. So.
I wanted to pick up on, before we did this session, we had a little bit of chat, and you said this quote that your granddad said, if you look after your livestock, they will look after you. And I think that's a really poignant quote, really, because that is at the heart of it all.
And it's that's from 3 generations ago, and it's still the same today, isn't it? So, And
what about you, Molly? What does animal health and welfare mean to you?
So I think it's really important in livestock farming. Obviously there's a lot of politics around eating meat and farming animals, but I think if we're going to farm livestock, it's really imperative that we do it well. We have really high levels of animal welfare, and as a country, that's what makes our livestock farms the best, I think, in the world. So it's just really important that we're keeping animals at the highest welfare levels we can.
And Nathan, what does it mean to you on your dairy farm?
Yeah, well, animal health and welfare on our farm, would be the same in any farm in the country. It's the foundation of the business, really. When you're farming livestock, it's like Jack said earlier. If you look after those livestock, cows in our case, and they will look after you. So yeah, I would say animal health and welfare. It's important now, and it's only going to get more important. Yeah, you can touch on, I suppose, the societal impact of, we want to be sharing a good news story as we go out, and if we can show people good work going on in farms and happy animals and healthy animals, then I think that's only going to be a benefit.
And a part of that improving animal health and welfare is creating an environment where they're living it is satisfactory and of high standards. So how, through this regenerative farming approach, how are we, on your individual farms, how are you ensuring that you are creating a healthy environment for your cows and for your sheep?
I think it is all about being proactive. So sustainability in farming, I think, is a combination of, in terms of livestock farming, good welfare, managing your finances, and looking at how you can maintain the environment. Because as farmers, we are the caretakers of the land, obviously. So it's about balancing the finances, the environment, the animal welfare. And I think they all link together, because if you're being proactive in your health management, in terms of, for example, fecal egg counting, which I do a lot of at work, you're reducing your use of wormer, reducing your resistance, you're financially saving money if you don't worm so often. And then it has a knock-on effect for the environment in terms of your grazing rotation. So it's all very interconnected, I think.
How about you, Jack?
The regenerative farming bit catches me out a little bit, because we've been doing mixed farming for hundreds of years at home, and it's no different to regenerative farming. It's just this new word that's popped up that everybody thinks, oh wow, this is great, but actually the mixed farming have been doing it for years. So yeah, it annoys me when someone says, oh, I'm a regenerative farmer. Well, mixed farming has been that for years. So yeah, just and gets under my skin a little bit.
And can you give me some examples on your farm and how you are managing the environment to improve animal welfare?
Yeah, so rotational farming, so we've got arable crops that then go into grassland for 5 years. So we put in a fresh lay in front of the cattle grazing, which is nice and clean, which is productive. And then we've always put little woodlands in where it's not quite, easy to farm, generate shade for the cattle, and then also an environment for, other animals. So yeah, it's all mixed in really.
And how about you, Nathan, on your farm?
Yeah, I would say, echoing a lot of what Jack said already. For us, it's about grassland management, but rotational grazing, about setting aside areas for nature then as well. So I suppose in our farm, it will be more small areas of woodland and a lot of bogland as well. So it's trying to best manage that, as well as we can in order to give that wildlife and I suppose biodiversity as a whole a chance to have that space.
In terms of your clients, Molly, and the advice that you're giving them in terms of, making sure that there is high animal welfare on farm and what strategies they can implement on farm to improve that environment for them.
Yeah, I think, again, like you said, it's a lot of them where they've got arable as well. It's stuff they've been doing for a long time anyway, like at home we've been doing that for a long time. It is about, I suppose, rotational grazing, because, like I said, in terms of parasite control, but also in terms of, say, lameness, for example, your pasture management is going to have a knock-on effect to that. So it's, again, a balance of the welfare and the environment.
But all these strategies that you're implementing is creating a more resilient farm business for you.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
you mentioned that it's all interlinked with, farms ultimately at the core of it are wanting to make a profit.
Yeah, I think it's all about, it's got to make sense financially. People have got to look at their business structure, how they manage the farm, how they manage their finances, and work out what they can do. But I think everything in terms of this regenerative farming, which, like you said, we've been doing for a long time, it's just about looking what we can do. Not everyone can do everything, but what can we slightly change, do a little bit better that's just going to benefit the ground that bit more, benefit your animals a bit more, and looking at that, I think.
If there's farmers listening to this, those kind of small initial steps, if they are thinking about how I can be more sustainable in the practices that they can implement on farm, what top tip would you give them?
Well, I would say for grassland farmers and for farmers who are grazing cattle or sheep or whatever animal it might be, I would say rotational grazing is your place to start. If you can set up paddocks or smaller areas for animals to graze in rotation, it's like Molly said earlier, it'll really cut down on the parasite burden. So you'll get a massive animal health benefit through that, and it's just best for the land as well. It's going to help to build your soil organic carbon, and it'll reduce any negative benefits that you might have had through set stocking. So if I was in their shoes, that's where I would start.
And in terms of management of disease in herds, how have some of the practices that you've implemented on farm helped that?
Well, back to the worms, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like rotational farming, that's the massive, clearing grassland and putting an arable crop in for 4 or 5 years and then back into grass. That's, it's like cleaning the shed out, isn't it?
I think it's about your monitoring, isn't it? If you're doing routine testing for, so say BVD, for example, and stuff like that in your cattle, it's just about your monitoring, seeing, do I need to deal with this or do I not? And monitoring your health, and having a high health herd is sustainable. Because if you're in a dairy and you're keeping replacement heifers, so you're keeping them, feeding them for 2-3 years, but your mortality rate is poor and you're losing those heifers, you've wasted 2 or 3 years worth of time and money keeping that animal alive. So a healthy flock or herd is the most sustainable way you can be a livestock farmer.
Yeah, is that the core, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I think that is it, yeah. And then you obviously have, if you want to get into genetics and stuff, like again, dairy farmers' genus are now moving more into the sustainable cow. Obviously you want to have high milk yields, etc. But if you've got, say, a smaller cow, you're not going to have to feed it less, but you're going to have the same output of milk. So stuff like that is another. The genetics is another
That's
massive
what I was
side of it.
It was the efficient breeding side of things for kind of sustainable livestock farming.
Yeah.
How are you implementing that within your own farm businesses?
Well, we're not breeding any livestock, so we're just buying in stores. So it doesn't really apply to us. But on the dairy side, I think the sex semen's amazing, isn't it?
It is. Sex semen. Well, we've been using sex semen on farm as long as I can ever remember, but it's more for me the information that semen companies have now on bulls in regard to health traits. That's been really building over the last 5 or 10 years. Within the UK now we have the Healthy Cow Index, which is an amalgamation of all of these different traits. So I could look today at a brochure for a semen company, see all the bulls they have on offer, and I'd be able to, they'll tell me the risk that bull's daughters will have for getting digital dermatitis, or for lameness, or for mastitis, or for having high cell counts. There's so many different management traits that I can select for and breed for that'll give me a healthier herd in the future.
And it's not only having that data available to you there from external organisations, but actually having the data available to you on farm and monitoring that. So, on farm, what kind of data collection are you doing when it comes to animal health and welfare?
Well, I suppose on the genetics side of it, I can track through the HDB herd genetic report. I'm able to track the genetic merit of all animals on my farm, through whether that is in their healthy cow index or whatever the trait is I want to look at. I'm able to track that and select for the best animals to produce offspring of. But I suppose wider reporting on animal health. There's a lot of information as dairy farmers that we get through the milk samples.
Yes.
So mastitis is a massive thing on dairy farms. So we milk through a robotic system at home, and through that, every time a cow is milked, I'll be able to pick up a reading of the conductivity of the milk from each quarter of that cow for that milking, which then is a reflection of the somatic cell count of that cow, and that's per quarter. So I'll be able to really easily pick up on any early cases of mastitis.
But in your case, that is investment that you put into the farm to be able to have access to that data. And I think that's such a core part of it, is the investment in new technology. And, through government grants, we're getting that coming down the line. But animal health, that should be an area that the government are investing in and supporting farmers to be able to invest on farm in that area.
We're running EIDs in all of our cattle, and so when they're bought, we put on there their price, where they came from, what farm they came from, what market, and every time they're weighed, then we know their daily live weight gains, and tracking them all the way through the farm to kill, and that's massive. That is it's really, really good.
And in terms of you, Molly, with your own farming clients, obviously doing animal health reports for on farms.
So the vet tech service is something that's been developed over the past few years, and it's just kind of gathering momentum to be kind of a legalised, not legalised, a recognised and verified in the same way that vet nurses are. So in terms of data handling, data collection, we're a vital service farms can use, because so often the vets go to the farms at your annual health review or your red tractor review and go, oh, have you got these numbers, have you got this data? And the farms go, oh, well, yeah, somewhere. They won't find it out, or they just don't have the data because they're too busy. So if farmers can utilise the vet tech service, which is hopefully a more affordable service than vets, then we can gather that data, we can process that data, feed it back to them and say, right, well, we've noticed this pattern, so what has caused this and what can we do about it to treat it or prevent it in the first place? So a lot of us vet techs do mobility scoring, which is obviously required for a lot of dairy contracts. So that's great because you're keeping an eye on the lameness and essentially the welfare in the herd, because you're seeing all of the cows. So even if it's not just lameness, you're seeing those animals. And when we're TB testing, so you can get a good picture of the welfare on that farm. And if something's not quite right, then we can speak to a vet and say, I've seen all the cows at this farm today. They looked a bit ropey, should we just have a word? And it's just about having that contact with farmers as well, because I think quite often they feel like the vets are there to sort of point out what they're doing wrong, or almost spying on them. They're worried they're going to get in trouble. So I think it's definitely a matter of utilising the vet tech service, and if we can get some momentum on that, I think that's a really useful tool.
Do you think there's a need for a kind of more streamlined approach when it comes to animal health and welfare in terms of the data collection? Because like you say, we've got them in dairy contracts, each farm system has different organisations that are asking for different bits of data.
Yeah, it's hard to streamline it, isn't it? Because these businesses are so different. Like a dairy farm to a pig farm to a beef farm. It's just...
So I believe there is some kind of collaboration in the works between DigiFarm, I don't know if you've heard of DigiFarm, and HDB, so that you essentially only have to input the data once. So, and obviously there's various apps that you can sort of input certain data, but there's a massive need for something. You can easily get your phone out your pocket, say, right, I've given this animal this medicine, and all your data is in one place. So when you get to your health plan, your red tractor review, you can just go on your iPad and say, it's all here, take a look.
I think that's the frustration of farmers, is the duplication, is the burden.
And there's a lot of farmers not very techy yet, isn't there?
Yeah,
so it's a long way behind some people.
And there's so much paperwork to everything now that it's a matter of, I think farmers do what they have to do, and anything extra, which this data to them is an extra that's not necessarily, oh, I've got to do that, then they're probably not going to bother because they've got so much other things to worry about.
Just out of interest, obviously under the new government funding, we've got the Animal Health and Welfare Grant. Have either of you, applied for that or looked into it?
Yeah, we've had 3 squeeze crushers on there, hydraulic squeeze crushers, a couple of handling systems, an outdoor handling system for sheep. Yeah, no, it's absolutely
really
brilliant.
benefited.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
And in terms of going forward, do you think that kind of similar funding needs to be available to kind of entice farmers to update the facilities, basically?
Yeah, because you all know as a vet, there's a lot of pretty
infrastructure is such a big thing. In terms of having appropriate housing for your livestock.
And safety to staff is massive now, isn't it?
I think a handling system again comes to that efficiency of, if you've, say, got to worm everything or you got to bolus everything and you've got a good handling system and you can just push them through in an hour, 2 hours, you can then get on with the rest of your day. Well, you go to farms, you've got to TB test, you've got 60 animals to do, and it takes all day because the handling system is not up to scratch. So I think, like you guys said, it's a massive help to farmers, and hopefully people have noticed the difference when they've got the new equipment.
Yeah, I think it is. It's, like you say, infrastructure is an essential part of making routine tasks easier and improving animal health through that. These sorts of grants are great to do that, but I think it can be, I'd rather not rely on grants to have to come in every 10 years or 20 years in order to get this new technology on farm. I think it would be a much better solution if farmers were able to fund that sort of investment naturally.
Which is a whole different debate in terms of fairness in the supply chain. But it's a very good point that you make there, Nathan, in terms of a lot of farmers, why should they have to rely on grants and funding? That actually the farm businesses themselves should be financially sufficient and sustainable to be able to do that. But unfortunately,
I think it does.
The current climate.
It does. It points to the lack of financial sustainability that we currently find in the sector and in the industry.
It's interesting. In terms of at the beginning there, we were saying about kind of the reputation of the industry and getting that message out there of our high animal welfare standards. Do you think we're doing enough?
Probably not. Probably not when you look at what the public is seeing, I suppose. There's a lot of stuff that we will know about and people here at Groundswell will know about going on, but it's almost behind closed doors if you're not already in the industry. I think when it comes to public perception, we should be able to lean on our farm quality assurance standards. So as long as we ensure that the standards themselves will uphold the sorts of animal health and welfare that we are looking for and that we're happy with, I think that's the place to start. And then our challenge is sharing that message to consumers. So whether that means more people on farm or more farmers in schools, or however we decide to do it, I think that's the first place to start.
Jeremy Clarkson's done quite a good job of that, I reckon, because he's got a great following, hasn't he? And he's, to be fair, everybody I speak to who's not in farming are like, have you watched Clarkson's farm?
Yeah.
And he comes across well for farmers, so, you need some very famous people to do it.
Yeah, because
like, if just some farmers from down the road go and do it, it doesn't really stand out, does it? Nobody else listens.
You're right. It's important to have more good ambassadors for the industry, public-facing ambassadors that we can point towards who can share the good news that's going on.
Like if Clarkson had some actual, like, proper farmers with him to take that message across, I think that would be very good.
There's no doubt that he's done an excellent job to try and get the industry out there, get people talking about farming. But in terms of reputational message, I want to speak more about labelling and food labelling. Do you think there needs to be more on that?
How far do you take it?
I know, and how
much can you fit on a label?
On packaging.
So I mean, we can all drive home the message of buying meat as local as possible. Well, not just meat, but all sorts of UK farmed produce. But when it comes to it, can everyone afford to shop at a farm shop or a specialised? I can't. I live at home because I can't afford to move out. So actually, I couldn't afford to buy all my produce at a farm shop for the month or the week or whatever. But what I can do is look for the red tractor and know that that's come from a red tractor assured farm, and look for the the GB logo. So again, it comes back to what can each person do. If they need cheap food, but they can look for the red tractor in UK, then actually if that's the best they can do, then that's good enough, I think. Hopefully I don't face too much backlash for that, but we can't all afford to go and spend lots of money on produce,
No.
And I think it goes back to the discussion we just had. It's kind of that fairness in the supply chain, that farmers are working hard, they are reaching high standards, and all farmers want is a fair return.
Yes.
And in terms of kind of animal health and welfare, if there was a top tip that you could give to farmers to kind of use their environment to improve animal health and welfare, what would it be, Nathan?
Top tip to use the environment. I would say know your soils, first of all. So know what you have in the ground.
I'm so glad you said this, because that's the first time we've actually started talking about soils, but it's such a critical point because, from the ground, if you don't look after your soils, then obviously it'll have ripple effects going through the farm business.
It's easy as farmers to get caught up in thinking that all of our effort is going into the livestock, and that is true. But essentially, as farmers, we're farming a land base, and that land base is capturing energy from the sun through the soil, and then we're growing crops, whether that's to sell crops directly or to feed animals. So it all goes back to the sun and the soil, really. So if we can ensure that the soil is operating as best as it can, the soil biology is all there as it should be, and the soil chemistry is at its optimal levels, and physically that soil is healthy as well, then I think you're setting yourself up as best you can. It's not a guarantee that you'll have a profitable business or even healthy livestock, but the healthiest livestock will be on healthy soils.
I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about soil. I'm not a biochemist like Nathan. So I'd go for probably pasture management in terms of rotational grazing, and also in terms of what breeds you've got to suit your land.
And you, Jack?
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried about this FSI and putting all these farms into wild bird seeds. Well, where those farms had, 200 cattle and some arable, that's all gone into wild bird seed. And the farmer down the road's thinking, well, I'm actually going to up my livestock. So you just bring the stocking density of that farm up, which creates more problems. And then over there, they've got a lovely wild bird mix. So I reckon stocking density is going to be increased on some farms and completely taken out on others, which I think is quite important.
What do you make of that point, Nathan?
I agree with the sentiment, definitely. I think You know, you have the ideal situation really when you're running a mixed farming enterprise, when you have the arable and then the grassland rotation within that. You know, that is, you'd be hard pressed to find a better balance between producing food, a high yield of good quality food, and keeping your soils and the environment healthy. You know, I think that is something that hopefully we see a move back towards over the next few years, but it's difficult as well because I know at home that it wouldn't, you know, our land isn't suitable to cropping, and there's a lot of land like that in the UK, so it's hard.
And that's an interesting point, is, you know, it came up in the first session as well, that every farm is different.
Yeah, massively so.
And you can't do a blanket approach.
Well, it's like the Cotswolds. The Cotswolds won't grow massive crops, so why don't we put that into FSI? And then the good, like, heavy clay that will grow some real good crops, keep farming it. You know, that's how we've got to approach it. But
it is. It makes it very difficult. I don't envy policymakers in that way.
No, and I think
definitely not.
The way we've seen SFI evolve over the last couple of years has proven to the fact that it is a complex issue, and that where it started was definitely not a place which people agreed with at all, and it has changed and adapted, but still it seems a lot of work still to be done.
It is a lot of work, but that's why it's so important to have that industry consultation whenever they're going through policy making. You know, it's because it's so different. If you travelled an hour on the motorway from one place to another, you'll be in a completely different landscape when it comes to agriculture. So it's very hard to make blanket statements and rules.
And in terms of hedgerow management, planting trees, obviously we've talked about kind of with livestock, you know, on a hot day like this, great shade for them. Is that something that you've incorporated within your systems?
yeah, definitely, yeah. Shade's massive for cattle, sunstroke and everything. So and plenty of water around there for them. And then also create an environment where land that can't be farmed, sometimes to put that into woodland or habitat creation or something like that.
Yeah, at home I suppose we're at the minute focused on, you know, maintaining the hedgerows we do have. I'd love to, over the next few years, hopefully convince Dad to expand some of that, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, as just as Jack said, there's a lot of research, and you'd probably know more about this, Molly, going on in dairy cows about heat stress, because it's becoming such a big issue here in the UK, especially with intensive housed herds. So there's a lot of work going on in controlling that environment and providing them, you know, the best chance we can, whether that's through fans and ventilation or sprinkler systems and adaptive technology. So yeah, there will be a lot of investment needed going forwards in, I suppose, offsetting those impacts of climate change.
I just wanted to pick up on that point of heat stress, Molly, because it is such a key topic that's being discussed within the dairy sector in particular at the moment.
So there's a few different approaches. So some people are, rather than grazing their animals, actually just keeping them in year round, which obviously is fine, providing that environment is fine from a health and welfare point of view. Like you said, ventilation. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of cow signals, but there's a lot of things in terms of your ventilation, your lighting, and yeah, the impact on milk production and milk yield from heat stress is massive, and it goes under the radar on some farms because they're not collecting their data, etc. But yeah, like you said, if you are going to keep them in and you're going to be adding fans, etc., things like that, then it's how we're going to offset that in an environmentally friendly way. So yeah, very, very interesting in terms of how we're going to balance it again, in terms of grazing or not grazing, and manage that.
Perfect. Well, I think that ends it quite nicely. So thank you ever so much for contributing today, and have the best day.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.